So you have a field in which it's taken for granted that truth can't be pursued. Again, dogmatically taken for granted that it can't be pursued. And a corollary to that is that, and again, Sarah mentioned this in Stanley's work, and Stanley, of course, has done the best work on Title VI, so barring not, and he's the guy to go read. A corollary to that is the belief or the assertion, again, utterly anti-intellectual, ahistorical, easy to disprove, yet believed by thousands, that non-Arabs or non-Muslims cannot study Islam or the Middle East in a way that is unbiased and that yields anything approaching truth. Forgetting for the moment there's no such thing as truth. Just keep that in your that contradiction in your mind. And so, I mean, in a sarcastic way, you could sum up Said's thesis as it's a Palestinian thing you wouldn't understand. I think, in a sense, this was really what he says. So Said took on and attempted to undermine and delegitimize, perhaps is the best word, generations of scholars who had come before him, who had really created the field of Middle East studies as it exists today. The tremendous disservice he did to them is obvious, but among those, the disservices is that these were by and large people who were very sympathetic to the inhabitants of the Middle East. They were anything but what he called them, which was, in effect, racist colonialists representing a hegemonic discourse, which means Western scholarship. They weren't that at all. They weren't that at all. In fact, they went to bat time after time after time for the people in the Middle East against the colonial powers, stretching back into the 19th century. So he ignored their work, slandered them, libeled them willingly, ignored the work of most Arabic scholars as well, whether they wrote in Arabic or English, made no difference. When you're writing a political tract, you tend to ignore those who inconvenience your argument by disagreeing with it, let alone disproving it, which is what Edward Said did. And so what occurred is that by into the 1980s, Middle East studies had become probably unrecognizable to someone who had died in, say, 1940, 1950. They would have felt completely lost had they been able to come back and see what had occurred within the field in which they had spent their lives. He had moved from philology, literally the love of words, the study of the history of language, the study of manuscripts, to agitprop in a lot of ways. Far less intellectually rigorous than it had been before. Obviously, for any Westerner to learn Arabic and Aramaic and Hebrew and on and on and on, it's an enormous expenditure in time and effort, regardless of one's giftedness in language skills. That became, in some ways, unnecessary. And in fact, Said himself, born in Jerusalem because his parents wanted to be there rather than Cairo when he was born to give birth, is an example of this. I mean, there's a scholar named Robert Irwin who has written a great book called Dangerous Knowledge, which I would, if you're interested in this at all, would encourage you to read. It came out in 2006. And Irwin shows, as others have shown too, that Said really didn't have that great a command of Arabic until he was an adult when he learned classical Arabic. Arabic wasn't spoken in the Said household, except to servants, apparently, because they were Western. He was actually Protestant, or he was raised Protestant. He was very proudly secular, but his background was not Islamic at all. It was not Muslim. So enter the Saudis into a field that has been upended this way, that has undergone enormous transformation within the period of one generation. What difference does Saudi money make to this? Is I think the key question. Again, I would argue it didn't change the minds of the people who were its original recipients, by and large. We'll get back to John Esposito in a second, but by and large what it did was it gave them a much larger megaphone. It increased their stature. It made them much more important among their peers. It increased their voice, and it let everyone in the field know that if you wanted to some days, I think Martin Kramer put it best as a Saudi prince fly in and tap you on the shoulder. He said, if you have any hope of this happening, you better watch what you say. You really better watch out. And if you go after the Saudis, if you turn your scholarly guns on them, then you blow off that possibility. Moreover, I think, and probably more importantly, with the advent of large sums of Saudi money, someone in their first session mentioned the $20 million given to Arkansas by King Fahd. There was $20 million, of course, most famously Georgetown in this area, $20 million to Harvard, another $5 million to Harvard. I'm just trying to, there's quite a sum of money overall given to Middle East studies. And here I'm not talking about Saudi donations to medical schools or biology departments and this kind of thing, which is another thing entirely, but that's not what we're talking about here, just to Middle East studies departments. The upshot of this, if you're a professor, is that your superiors, at least as counted in the academic pecking order, your intellectual and social superiors, are now endowed with large sums of money, and they set the pace of the field. And centers such as the Prince Al-Walid Center here at Georgetown, or the Harvard Center for Middle East Studies, or others, whether recipients of Saudi largesse or not, set the pace for others to follow. The academic pecking order is a vicious thing, but it's true, and people can buck it, and the best scholars do, I think, whenever it's called for, but many don't. So, and of course, academics are famously herd-like in their instincts. I mean, I think it's just like the news media. I think that's a perfect analogy to think of the elite media and how they move in lockstep so that, as Ali said earlier, the New York Times won't touch the story on care, the Post won't touch the story on care. And similarly, certain questions that would be directed against Saudi Arabia or the Middle East in general aren't touched by most scholars, because that's just not what one does. It's very easy, I think, to underestimate or to ignore the power of peer pressure within academia and the power of social and professional ostracism within academia. It's extremely powerful among professors. There's a million ways a dean or a department head can take you down. There's a thousand tricks that they have at their disposal, from refusing to give you raises to, sorry, John, you're going to have to teach the 650 class again this semester. I hate to do that to you. To all sorts of stuff, putting your tests at the end of the semester, to being cold-shouldered, to being turned down by journalists, to having a hard time getting an editor to represent your work. There's a million ways you can become on the outs. Saudi money in this quantity, let me say one word about the quantity of this. $20 million would be a lot for the think tank at which I worked. Would be a lot for any think tank. I mean, the biggest ones in town would obviously love to give a $20 million donation. But in the world of higher education, it doesn't appear that large, because this is an industry, and you really should think of it as an industry, that spends hundreds of billions of dollars a year. It's untold money, resources that most industries can't command. And it has still an extraordinarily good reputation by and large.